Hello again. Today I'm going to be building an enclosure for the koala in order to finally finish out the Australia section. I'm also going to be formatting this video just like the panda enclosure because I noticed that there was a bit more audience retention compared to my other format. Speaking of audience retention, thank you so much for clicking on this video. I really enjoy making content, and knowing that you're watching this video right now makes me so excited to make more content just like this one. Let's get right into the build. I wanted to make this enclosure have more of a zoo feel, if that makes sense. I also really like the idea of guests being able to walk around the enclosure, since all but one of my enclosures so far have only one viewing point. I also started out with a chain link fence, much like I did the pandas backstage area. I connected them to form kind of a funky little shape, then made an area for the door and rose everything up to give the koalas about an 8-meter space to climb up. I also made sure to make the frame climbable in order to add more realism to the enclosure. For the top of the enclosure I added iron rods, but I don't really like how cage-like this enclosure looked. I was going to do some mesh fencing, but that wouldn't really be good because it wouldn't look clean, so instead I went with a bar design. I trimmed everything up and made sure that it was the right spot before moving on to pathing. For the pathing, I started out by making sure that the terrain texture was right. Throughout the entire Australia section, I've been going for a natural, dusty dirt path. I've also been including rocks in order to add texture. However, I wish that I was able to add texture without making the path seem inaccessible, especially for people with disabilities. I know that sounds really weird and random, but with almost every design I do in Planet Zoo, I try to make it as realistic as possible, as well as include details like accessibility concerns. Nerdiness aside, I continued this sort of farm railing for the rest of the Australia section. This, of course, took forever and is very boring to watch, but afterwards I added some rock textures on the sides of the railing in order to make the other side of the rail seem more inaccessible. In this section, I also added restrooms in order to try and fill up more space on the paths. I also planted a lot outside the enclosure in order to kind of tie the whole path in together. I also found out that the eucalyptus trees would be too tall for the enclosure, so I made the whole thing taller. I also deleted a lot of sunshades and replaced them with trees in order to make the whole path feel like a nature walk instead of a zoo. Although I don't know much about Australian plants and terrain, I planted very heavily in order to obscure other sections and further seclude the area. My next step was to buy the koalas, decorate their enclosure, and put them in. I bought Chloe and Mila and started decorating by adding plants and climbing frames. The climbing frames are very large and open, and I added a little tree-like climbing frame because there weren't many good eucalyptus options in my opinion. I added safety nets and put the koalas in their new enclosure. Overall, I really like the placement and design of this enclosure, but again, as I said before, I don't really like the roof of the enclosure. It feels too prison-like, whereas I'm trying to promote more of an open and free atmosphere for the animals. This enclosure was overall a really fast one to build, even with planting and fencing. I'm going to eventually add education boards and stuff, especially before I do a tour of the Australia section. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've enjoyed the video. I know it seems a lot shorter than usual, but this build took only about 4 to 5 hours to build. I hope to see you soon!